Uh, I must say that since we handed over the report, I have not spoken or written even single word about the LLRC for a very good reason. Even this opportunity I agreed because this is more of a academic presentation. There are many students, I am told. So, and also I must say at the outset that whatever I say are my personal views and my personal opinions, and neither the LLRC or any of its members are responsible in any way for what I express here. All responsibility will be mine and mine alone. All right. First, now, what I am not going to, these are the issues that have arisen since the LLRC report has been handed over in the public discussion and both national and international public discussion and public actions. So my focus is on the public discussions and public actions, not on these issues, but I will be touching on them, not at depth on these issues. Instead of reading because of the time, let me move on. I think you can. So hopefully you can also read it on the screen. And also forgive me for my accent. I have been away for 30 years, and also my if you see this American spelling, that's the way my word processor writes. Okay. So, all right. The frame of analysis in discussing the public discussion on those issues, when we look at perceptual reality versus objective reality, that's the how I have defined reality here. There are two types of realities: the perceptual reality, which is what most people believe is true, but then there's objective reality, which is not very different from the perceptual reality. Usually people's perceptual reality can be influenced by what is published, what you read, what you hear from your parents, maybe from your neighbors or whatnot, but it may not be necessarily real, although you believe that it to be real. And to give an example, just a very simple example, if I say a table, you already get a picture of a table, right? Something with a flat surface and long legs, 4 legs at least. But if you say table to a Japanese person, the picture in his mind is very different. Something very short and with short legs. So likewise, so perceptual reality. Okay. All right. Let's. So I am going to be analyzing these. Hopefully, we have time very quickly using theories from history, historical theories, social scientific theories, and law all together. Okay. Now, first the background. Everyone knows, of course, that the LTT operated outside of Sri Lanka through its operatives and their crime syndicates to raise funds and buy weapons through racketeering, human smuggling, money laundering, among other crimes. And even their political leader, Mr. Balasingham, resided in UK. So they had an international operation. That's the point I want to make first. And although they had an international operation, this issue was not internationalized up until after 9/11. Okay, and after 9/11, it was internationalized, and when it was internationalized, it exposed the brutality of the tactics adopted by the LTTE, and it helped Sri Lanka to win support from other countries. In fact, Mr. Kadragama, as the foreign minister, used that for the benefit of the country at that time, the internationalization. Internationalization was cleverly manipulated by the LTTE though, and it reached a high point with the Norwegian peace process. Sri Lanka was, and the problem with internationalization is this. This is what I want to make very clear. With the internationalization, Sri Lanka came to be viewed, due to propaganda or whatever, as a quote unquote failed state that needed intervention. Under the international law, there will be no intervention, whether by Human Rights Commission or UN or whatever, or by other states, even by regional states, unless they believe that a particular state has failed. So, this state has failed to be a good member of the international community. And why they intervene in, because they then say that it threatens the democracy, it threatens security, regional security, and so on and so forth. So, it came to be viewed as a failed state. Now, there came the international intervention in terms of a peace process. Okay? And so, the problem was the government of Sri Lanka at the time embraced the peace process. I am not sure whether they did it knowingly, purposely, or just did it for other reasons. But based on the evidence we heard before the commission, it was mostly influenced by economic and other reasons. They didn't really think through that much, apparently. And obviously, that brought some repercussions. And we are still discussing former Attorney General Mr. Mohan Piri's address to those. The foreign policy sector in Sri Lanka, up until then, was hardly in the forefront of the Sri Lankan domestic political scene. People hardly knew about the foreign minister, what they do. And since then, the foreign ministry became a prominent player. So what I am now mentioning about for the background is the power play that also went on and has been going on. The internationalization helped bring neighboring countries who were willing to help Sri Lanka on the one hand. However, the Western nations' involvement was based on their beliefs of stability, security, and development. That's how they frame it. Okay? So, for them it was a matter of helping a failed state to secure, stabilize, and develop in accordance with their norms of democracy. That's how it works. So, this has to be understood. Western nations have focused on the threats to global security generally in terms of trade, commerce, and regional security, and that a failed state of Sri Lanka in this case may pose in the case of Sri Lanka. In other states it's the same. Okay? So, democratization, peace, and stability really have become over time instruments of, I call them instruments of utility for international interference or intervention. Right? They are instruments of utility, like a knife is a utility, instrument of utility, excuse me. So, diplomacy took center stage and the role of diplomacy was transformed with that. I am talking about Sri Lanka, Sri Lankan diplomacy. So, after the peace process ended abruptly and the humanitarian war against terrorism intensified, the internal security then became the central focus. With that, the defense sector became a prominent player and the foreign ministry was relegated to its traditional role of focusing on international relations to accommodate, promote, and co-op support for the domestic policies and political processes with the war at the top of the agenda. That's how it happened. And so that's why sometimes you hear complaints from some foreign policy people, diplomats, oh, when Mr. Kadragama was there, it was like this, but now it is, but whatever, they had a lot of power then and the power was relegated. Especially after the war, rule of law, good governance. Now what happened was after the war, rule of law, good governance, equality, human rights, war crimes, and accounting for the crimes have become major instruments of utility for the so-called international, I use the term so-called international community because some of those who claim to be international community are not necessarily members of the international community. For example, certain NGOs, for example, okay, who even try to be observers at certain international events. LTT remnants, sympathizers, and spoilers. Spoilers, I mean those who are angry that they lost the war and they feel bad, and revenge seekers. Some are revenge seekers, some are spoilers. They manipulated the relevant players, the various countries, etc., through a media campaign and other means. And these elements have launched a massive campaign to label and stereotype the majority of the Sri Lankan population, its political leaders, the military and the Buddhist clergy as haters, murderers, war criminals, human rights violators and oppressors. This is what you hear when you go out of the country, really. You even read, even in newspapers they publish, on the web they publish. This campaign portrays Sri Lanka as a failed state and a dictatorship, even worse than before the ending of the war. So what they are doing with their campaign is labeling Sri Lanka ultimately as a failed state to invite international intervention. That's what is going on. The appointment of the LLRC was labeled by these campaigners as a muted response of a failed state to international moves toward intervention. That's how they labeled it. The LLRC was influenced by the thinking and needs of diplomacy. Perhaps the LLRC itself was influenced by the thinking and needs of diplomacy, perhaps due to international pressure, and focused on the instruments of utility and followed up with recommendations to address these issues toward reconciliation. When you read the report, you can see that's where the report is focused on and that's where it's going. And then actually that is the biggest weakness of the report in my view. Nobody has pointed out, I think for the first time somebody is saying this. I hope it's okay. But the biggest weakness of the report is that to some extent, I'm not saying fully, to some extent, it tacitly accepts, not directly, the assumption that Sri Lanka is a failed state and move on to make recommendations. If you read chapter 2, that's what the chapter 2 reads more like. Okay, it's a tacit acceptance which I don't agree with. I must also say, you might ask, you are a member, you signed the report, how can you say this now? You have to understand when you work in a small group, it was a group of 8 members. No member can have 100% obviously. When you work in a small group, when you are a member of 8, you have to there's a give and take that has to happen. You have to build consensus. That's how it works in a democracy. So I think in a way by signing and by having this report as a unanimous report, it also shows that in Sri Lanka, even in a way within governmental sector, the democracy works, I think. Okay. That's the way I would put it. So actually in my view, so the LLRC missed a golden opportunity to challenge this assumption that Sri Lanka is a failed state by showing that the foundation and pillars upon which this assumption is based are perhaps empirically invalid and intellectually unreasonable. And if I have the time later on, I can give you some evidence, but I don't know, we'll see. Okay. The national and international naysayers and critics were happy. That's why they embraced the LLRC report, because it had reaffirmed their basic assumption that Sri Lanka is a failed state, therefore these actions must be taken. They quickly accepted the LLRC report and insisted upon the implementation of its recommendations. These are the same naysayers who earlier rejected. At the same time, they criticized the parts of the report that did not agree with their instruments of utility. For example, chapter 4, which deals with IHL. It doesn't go with what they wanted, right? Okay. Now I am going to focus on those issues that I mentioned before. So you have the background information, not on the issues, but the rhetoric and reality as regards those issues. First, let's look at the post-conflict violence that every day you read in the newspaper, all kinds of, everybody is commenting. Okay. In fact, I was so alarmed to see one of the individuals who is considered an intellectual in this country, who holds a high position in an intellectual manner, and has written. I read his article in a newspaper, and he begins it by saying, "Sri Lanka is at its lowest point in the history." I couldn't believe that I was reading. I couldn't believe my eyes, because if that is the lowest point in the history, when we were under colonial rule, that was not a lower point, okay? And when we had LTTE killing innocent civilians and people couldn't even go to work or go about doing their work, we never had our lowest point. So obviously, I don't know. Anyway, that is that type of comment. So you can